18th, 1982. London awoke to the body of a man hanging beneath one of its oldest bridges. He was dressed in an expensive grey suit. His shoes, polished Italian leather, and in his pockets over €15,000 in cash in multiple currencies. At first glance it looked like suicide, but the more investigators looked, the less it made sense. The man's name was Roberto Calvi, chairman of Banco Ambrosiano, the Vatican's private banker known in headlines as God's banker, and the bridge where his body was found. Its name, Blackfriars, would soon take on a meaning far darker than anyone imagined. Because the truth behind his death wasn't just about money, it was about power, religion, and a secret brotherhood that reached into the highest levels of government and faith itself. Before we uncover the truth about God's banker, make sure to subscribe to The Lost Fear and ring that notification bell, so you never miss another story where history meets horror. Tell us in the comments, where are you watching from tonight? Globe showing Europe, Africa. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers. Now, let's go back to where this all began. In post-war Italy, the line between religion and power blurred into something unholy. The Vatican wasn't just a place of faith. It was a financial empire hidden behind centuries of secrecy. By the 1970s, the Vatican Bank, officially known as the Istituto per la Opera di Religione, or IRE, had become one of the most powerful and least transparent institutions in Europe. It was meant to handle church funds, missionary work, and charitable accounts. But beneath that divine purpose flowed something else, billions in untraceable money. And the man who held the keys to that labyrinth was Roberto Calvi. Born in Milan in 1920, Calvi began his career like any ambitious young Italian banker, quiet, meticulous, and loyal. By the 1960s, his name was whispered with respect across Italy's marble banking halls. But Calvi had something others didn't, a relationship with the Vatican's own financial wing. Through a mix of charm, discretion, and careful manipulation, he rose to head Banco Ambrosiano, one of Italy's most respected institutions. But Ambrosiano wasn't just another bank. It was a conduit, a network of secret subsidiaries in Luxembourg, Panama, and the Bahamas. On paper, these branches served international clients. In reality, they moved money for the Vatican, Italian politicians, and shadowy groups operating in the gray zones of the Cold War. By the late 1970s, Roberto Calvi had become the unofficial treasurer of modern power. Newspapers began calling him God's banker, the man trusted by the Holy See to protect its fortunes. He attended Mass regularly, quoted scripture, and smiled warmly for cameras. But behind closed doors, Calvi's empire was built on secrets and fear. Calvi's closest ally was Archbishop Paul Marcinkus, an American prelate from Chicago who served as the head of the Vatican Bank. Marcinkus once said, "You can't run a church on Hail Marys." Under his guidance, the Vatican Bank began doing business with entities no church should ever touch: arms dealers, secret intelligence channels, and political groups fighting communism in Latin America and Eastern Europe. The Vatican justified it as part of a holy mission, supporting anti-communist forces during the Cold War. But the reality was darker. Money was disappearing. Millions flowed through offshore accounts disguised as charitable aid. And every wire transfer left a faint trail that, if followed, would expose the unholy alliance between faith, finance, and organized crime. In 1977, Calvi made a fateful decision that would seal his fate forever. He joined a secret Masonic lodge known as Propaganda II, or P2. Officially, Freemasonry was banned in Italy for Catholics. The Vatican had condemned it for centuries. But P2 wasn't an ordinary lodge. It was a shadow government composed of high-ranking military officers, judges, businessmen, and politicians. At its head was Licio Gelli, a smooth-talking fascist sympathizer with deep ties to the intelligence world. P2 promised its members protection, power, and access in exchange for absolute loyalty. and Roberto Calvi became one of its most valuable assets. Through Banco Ambrosiano, Calvi helped move vast sums of money for P2 members and their international allies. They used shell companies, secret codes, and even religious institutions to disguise their transfers. To the public, Calvi remained a respectable banker. To those inside the lodge, he was their financial magician. But power like that never comes without a price. By 1978, cracks began to appear. Auditors noticed strange irregularities in Ambrosiano's balance sheets. Loans that didn't make sense, subsidiaries that seemed to exist only on paper, and in the background, rumors of Mafia connections. Some said Calvi was laundering money for the Sicilian Cosa Nostra. Others whispered about drug funds passing through Panamanian fronts. Calvi's empire was beginning to rot from within. But even then, he believed he was untouchable, protected by the church, by jelly, and by the secret network that had made him powerful. Then, in 1978, a second event shook Italy and changed everything. In August 1978, Pope John Paul I died mysteriously after only 33 days in office. Officially, it was a heart attack, but rumors immediately circulated that the new pope had been preparing to clean up the Vatican Bank, and that Calvi's dealings were among the first files on his desk. Within weeks of John Paul I's death, the Vatican's tone changed. The investigation into the bank's finances slowed. Calvi was safe for now, but in private he grew paranoid. He began telling associates that they were watching him, that if something happens to me it won't be suicide. The fear that had once controlled others had come for him. In 1981, everything unraveled. Italian police raided Liciogelli's villa and discovered a list of P2 members, nearly 1,000 names, including top generals, judges, and bankers. Among them, Roberto Calvi. The list shocked Italy. It was proof of a hidden power structure, a shadow network manipulating the nation from within. And at its financial core was Ambrosiano Bank. Calvi was arrested and charged with illegal currency exports and fraud. Though temporarily released on bail, his reputation was destroyed. The Vatican, his once loyal partner, began to distance itself. But he still held one advantage: he knew too much. In letters to colleagues, Calvi hinted at the Vatican's involvement. He threatened to expose everything if left to take the fall alone. What he didn't know was that his fate had already been decided. By May 1982, Calvi was a hunted man. Banco Ambrosiano was collapsing under $1. $3 billion in debt, money that had vanished into offshore black holes. Arrest was imminent, and the people whose secrets he carried, politicians, priests, and killers alike, wanted him silent. On June 10, 1982, Calvi disappeared from Rome. His secretary, Graziella Caraccier, leapt to her death from a fourth-floor window the very same day. Her final note read, "The scandal is too much. I can't bear it." No one knew where June 10, 1982, Rome. Roberto Calvi left his home on Via di Porta Pinciana before dawn. He told his driver he had an urgent business meeting. He carried a briefcase stuffed with documents, a rosary, and 2 passports. But that morning, no one saw him again. By nightfall, police arrived at his office. His secretary, Graziella Caraccier, had already jumped from the window. Witnesses said she was pale, shaking, whispering that the walls are closing in. Hours later, Calvi's wife, Clara, found an envelope left on his desk. Inside were bank statements, torn notes, and a single handwritten phrase: "The truth is buried in London." No one knew what it meant. But by the time investigators began to search, Calvi was already out of the country. According to later testimony, Calvi fled Italy with the help of a Swiss financier named Flavio Carboni, a man rumored to have deep ties to both the Mafia and the Masonic Lodge P2. Carboni arranged Calvi's escape using a private plane from Venice to Zurich, then to London through an alias passport, Gian Roberto Calvini. He checked into Chelsea Cloisters, an upscale apartment building on Sloane Avenue, under a false name. The bellboy later recalled, he looked exhausted, like a man carrying something heavier than his suitcase. Inside the apartment, Calvi began making desperate phone calls. He contacted Vatican officials, business partners, and even Italian politicians, pleading for help. He believed the Vatican owed him protection, but no one answered his calls. For 9 days, the man once known as God's banker became a ghost, hiding in the shadows of London. London in 1982 was a paradox, modern and ancient, glittering and grim. The docks of the Thames reeked of oil and salt. Fog rolled in heavy from the river, muffling the sound of footsteps. It was a city where money and mystery coexisted perfectly, the perfect place for a man to disappear. Calvi was seen at least twice, once near St. Paul's Cathedral, once outside the Vatican's London representative office. Each time, he seemed agitated, pacing, clutching a small briefcase. Witnesses said he muttered in Italian, "They have betrayed me, I gave them everything." What he carried in that briefcase would later become one of the greatest missing artifacts in financial history. Inside were rumored to be documents detailing Vatican transactions, Mafia connections, and political payoffs. Those papers were never found. On the evening of June 17, 1982, Calvi dined with Flavio Carboni and 2 other men at a restaurant in Chelsea. A waiter recalled that Calvi barely touched his food. He stared at the window, fingers trembling around his glass of wine. When Carboni paid the bill, Calvi leaned close and whispered, "If they find me tomorrow, remember I did not hang myself." It was the last time anyone saw him alive. June 18, 1982, 7:30 a.m. Postal clerk named John Kent crossed Blackfriars Bridge on his way to work. He stopped when he saw something swaying beneath the bridge's stone arch, a shape in the morning fog. When he looked closer, he saw the body of a man hanging from an orange rope tied to a scaffolding beam. The man's feet just grazed the water. Police arrived minutes later. The corpse was identified by his passport, Roberto Calvi. He was dressed immaculately, gray suit, polished shoes, expensive watch. His pockets contained $15,000 in cash in pounds, Swiss francs, and Italian lira, 5 bricks of concrete, and a bricklayer's rope. There were no signs of struggle nearby. The briefcase was gone. At first it looked like suicide, but details didn't fit. Why would a man about to kill himself carry so much cash, and weigh down his pockets with bricks? Why choose Blackfriars Bridge, a name echoing the Blackfriars or Frati Neri, the very nickname used by members of the secret Masonic Lodge P2? As one detective later said, it felt less like suicide and more like a message. When investigators studied the scene, they found eerie parallels to P2's internal rituals. In Masonic symbolism, hanging under a bridge between earth and water represented punishment for treason, and the color black, the friar's robe, symbolized secrecy betrayed. To those who understood the language of power, Calvi's death wasn't random. It was an execution masked as humiliation. Detective Sergeant John McNamara, who arrived first on the scene, recalled, "There was no way he climbed down there alone. The scaffolding was unstable, slippery. You'd need help just to tie the rope." Even stranger, no fingerprints were found on the bricks or the rope. A homeless man, Francesco Di Carlo, sleeping near the river that night, told reporters he heard a motorboat beneath the bridge at around 1:00 a.m., then silence, followed by footsteps. Di Carlo later vanished before testifying. Years later, Mafia informants claimed he had been involved in the operation itself, and silenced afterward. The fog of London didn't just hide the crime, it swallowed the witnesses too. News of Calvi's death exploded across Europe. Newspapers in Rome screamed God's banker found dead in London. Within hours, the Italian stock market tumbled. At the Vatican, officials issued a short, cold statement. "We are saddened by the loss of Mr. Calvi. We pray for his soul." No mention of Banco Ambrosiano. No acknowledgement of the billions missing from its accounts. Inside the Vatican walls there was chaos. Archbishop Marcinkus, Calvi's closest ally, ordered the immediate destruction of certain files within the IOR. Secretary staff were instructed never to speak of Calvi again. But outside those walls, investigators were already tracing the money. Through a maze of offshore companies, detectives found more than $1.3 billion transferred out of Banco Ambrosiano, much of it into Vatican-controlled accounts. The funds linked to shell corporations in Panama, Luxembourg, and Liechtenstein, some of which led to organizations connected to arms deals and Latin American dictatorships. One internal Vatican memo described the transfers as discreet aid for anti-communist allies, but for investigators, the trail led somewhere darker, the Sicilian Mafia's heroin network. Calvi's bank had been the washing machine of two worlds, divine and criminal. And when the machine broke, the owners needed someone to take the blame. Calvi's widow, Clara, insisted from day one that her husband was murdered. She claimed he had told her, "If I die, it will not be suicide. I will be killed." She later said that in the weeks before his disappearance, strangers followed their car. One night, a black Mercedes idled outside their home for hours. Another witness, Ernesto D'Ottolivi, a businessman with alleged mafia ties, told police he had been asked to help a friend in London. He refused. Weeks later, he fled Italy entirely. And then there was Flavio Carboni, the man who arranged Calvi's escape. He vanished for months after the death, later reappearing in Switzerland, insisting he had no idea what happened. But phone records showed calls between his number and known members of the Magliana gang, Rome's most feared criminal syndicate, the night before Calvi's body was found. Each layer peeled away revealed another web of power, but at its center silence. For ordinary Italians, the scandal was almost unbearable. To think that the Church, the symbol of faith and purity, could be entangled in corruption, and death was psychological heresy. So many refused to believe it. Papers printed phrases like the tragedy of a fallen man or God's banker and his guilt. The suicide story gave people a sense of closure, however false. It allowed them to keep their faith intact, but investigators knew something darker had unfolded beneath the Thames. Every clue pointed to one truth. Calvi had been silenced to protect a system older and more powerful than any single man. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button. It really helps us uncover more lost histories just like this one. And if someone you know loves unraveling dark mysteries, share this video with them. Because what happens next will change the story forever. Let's find out what investigators discovered in the days that followed, and how the truth about God's banker nearly tore the Vatican apart.